There are certain places where the natural world feels slightly out of alignment, places where instinct quietly urges people to turn around long before logic understands why. In most situations, those instincts are dismissed as imagination. Humans are remarkably skilled at rationalizing discomfort. We call it nerves or fatigue. But sometimes the subconscious mind recognizes a pattern of threat long before conscious awareness can formulate a sentence. The forest in this case appeared, at first glance, entirely ordinary. It did not possess the jagged, gothic aesthetics of a horror film. There were no twisted, blackened branches or unnatural mists. Located several miles beyond a rural trail system in the Pacific Northwest, the region had long been known to local hikers as quiet but beautiful. The trail wound through dense pine and cedar, forming a narrow corridor beneath a thick canopy that filtered sunlight into a dim, oceanic green light. That reputation changed after a group of 4 hikers, Elias, Sarah, Mark, and Chloe, entered the area during late autumn. They were not amateurs. Elias was a former search and rescue volunteer. Sarah and Mark had climbed significant peaks. Chloe was a biological researcher. They were exactly the type of people who do not panic. Yet they became the focus of an unusual psychological investigation that challenged the very definition of environmental stability, the anatomy of silence. The group had chosen the trail for its isolation. They expected silence. They expected long stretches without encountering other human beings. But within the first hour of entering the forest, the quality of that silence began to feel heavy, almost viscous. Experienced hikers develop a subconscious awareness of environmental rhythm. In healthy forests, that rhythm is built from thousands of small signals: the persistent hum of insects, the rhythmic tapping of woodpeckers, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, and the layered sighing of wind through various leaf densities. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, stopping abruptly. "Hear what?" Mark replied, adjusting his pack. "Exactly. Nothing. Not even a fly." The silence was not simply quiet, it was complete. It was a vacuum. No birds called overhead. No insects hummed beneath the fallen needles. Even the wind, which they could see moving the highest needles of the pine, seemed to produce no sound at ground level. At first, the group reacted with rational filters. Late season, Chloe noted, though her voice lacked conviction. Cold snap might have killed off the insects. The birds might have moved to the valley for the winter. Each explanation was plausible in isolation, but together, the pattern created a cognitive dissonance. The forest did not feel empty. It felt paused, like a breath being held indefinitely. The first displacement, approximately 2 hours into the hike, the group stopped near a cluster of ancient cedars. Elias had been wearing a GoPro mounted to his shoulder strap, recording intermittent footage for a trail vlog. The camera, capturing wide-angle glimpses of the environment, became the primary evidence for what followed. While they rested, the footage shows the group eating in relative silence. The tension is visible in their posture. They aren't leaning back. They are sitting upright, eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. "Does that cedar look closer to the trail than it did 5 minutes ago?" Chloe asked, pointing to a massive trunk about 20 feet away. Mark laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Trees don't walk, Chloe. You're just tired. Perspective shifts when you sit down." But the camera recorded something the human eye missed in real time. In the background of the shot, a secondary trunk, a smaller hemlock, is visible. When Elias turns to grab his water bottle, the camera swings away. When he turns back 3 seconds later, the hemlock is no longer visible in the frame. It hasn't just moved, it has repositioned itself behind the larger cedar. As the hike continued, the uncertainty shifted into a tactile sense of being watched. This is a biological phenomenon known as scopaesthesia, the sensation of being stared at. In a forest, this is usually attributed to predators like cougars. But here, there were no tracks, no scent of musk, no snapping twigs. The marker test, the psychological transition from unease to threat recognition, occurred at 2:14 p.m. The group had become so disoriented by the shifting landscape that Elias decided to conduct a formal test. "We're going to mark this spot," Elias said, his voice recorded clearly on the footage. He took a bright orange survey ribbon and tied it firmly around a branch of a distinctive lightning-scarred pine. We walk 50 paces forward, turn around, and see if the alignment holds. They walked. The camera shows the group counting in unison. At 50 paces they turned. The orange ribbon was still there, glowing brightly against the green. But the geometry of the forest had fundamentally altered. The lightning-scarred pine, which had been on the left side of the trail, was now positioned in the center of the path. The two trees that had previously flanked it were now gone from view, replaced by a dense wall of younger saplings that seemed to have closed in like a curtain. "That's not possible," Sarah whispered. The footage shows her hand trembling as she reaches for her compass. "The needle is spinning, Elias. It won't lock." This is where cognitive load saturation began. The brain, overwhelmed by conflicting spatial information, starts to fail. The group's decision-making slowed to a crawl. They began to argue not about direction, but about reality itself. The systemic response investigators later stabilized the footage and tracked fixed reference points along the forest floor. Their analysis showed a terrifying reality. The trees were moving, but only when they fell outside the direct line of sight of the hikers or the camera lens. This behavior reflected a principle known as observer dependence. In quantum mechanics, the act of observation changes the state of a particle. In this forest, the act of observation seemed to lock the environment in place. The trees were frozen only as long as a human eye perceived them. The moment the group blinked, turned their heads, or adjusted their gaze, the forest recalculated its layout. The most disturbing sequence occurs in the final hour of the recording. The group is now in a full-blown flight response, attempting to backtrack. However, the trail had vanished. "Where is the creek?" Mark shouted. "We crossed a creek 10 minutes ago." In its place stood a wall of timber so thick it looked as though it had grown there over centuries. At 4:42 p.m., Elias tripped over a protruding root. The camera swung wildly, pointing upward at the canopy. For roughly 7 seconds, none of the 4 hikers were looking at the ground or the immediate horizon. In that brief interval, the footage captures something unmistakable. In the periphery of the lens, multiple massive trunks shift simultaneously. They do not slide, they step. The movement is silent, fluid, and deliberate. It is the movement of a predator closing a trap. The exit. The group eventually found their way out, but not through their own navigation. A path simply opened for them. A long, straight corridor of trees that led directly back to the trailhead. It was as if the forest had finished its study of them and was now ushering them out. When they reached the parking lot, they didn't speak. They drove in silence. It wasn't until the footage was reviewed by third-party analysts that the full scale of the anomaly was understood. The final conclusion of the psychological report was chilling. The forest did not behave like a landscape or a collection of biological organisms. It behaved like a single sentient system, a system that was acutely aware of being watched, and one that clearly preferred the dark, unobserved moments of the world. The hikers never returned, and despite numerous follow-up expeditions, no one has ever been able to find that specific configuration of trees again. The forest, it seems, only reveals its true shape to those it chooses to surround.